Hey guys, welcome back to Reserved Investments on YouTube. Today, I bring you another whiteboard video. Whether or not you guys like these, hopefully you learn a lot from these videos because they are paramount on this channel and they allow me to teach the basics of the antiques and collectibles trade. Today, we are going to be talking about the life cycle of the average pop culture collectible. Now, I want to be very clear here. We are not talking about antiques. We are not talking about high-end pieces of art. We are not talking about antiquities. We are solely talking about items that are considered collectibles on the marketplace today and pretty much the life cycle that they go through. So it doesn't matter if you collect comic books. It doesn't matter if you collect video games. It doesn't matter if you collect Pez dispensers. It doesn't matter if you collect Barbie dolls. Doesn't matter if you collect Pokemon, Magic the Gathering, or any other form of an item that is considered collectible and is being sold on a secondary market at present time in the year 2021. This applies to you. So I want to make that very clear. This can be any and all pop culture collectibles today, whether they are alive and well, whether they are in speculative bubbles, whether they are starting to die out. This is the life cycle that your average collectible goes through. Now, don't worry if you cannot read anything that's written on this board. I'm going to explain it to you in great detail. But first, I have some statements to make. Some of the best long-term collectibles that ever hit the market today in the year 2021 were never marketed and sold as collectibles. They were never, ever intended to be collectibles. And this is true with Magic the Gathering cards. This is true with most comic books. This is true with even video games, Pokemon cards. Even if we go back and we look at vintage toy lines, even if we look at Pez, Lionel trains, Barbie, Hot Wheels, all that stuff was introduced onto the market for a purpose of serving some type of purpose other than being a collectible in nature. Now, this is very important because one of the best experts in the trade, Harry Rinker, came up with something known as Harry Rinker's 30-year rule. And for those of you that watch this channel often, I've already referred to this. For the first 30 years of anything's lifespan, its value is purely speculative. That's what Harry Rinker stated when he created the 30-year rule. Now, it's very important that before we go any further on this list, you understand this concept because it literally takes 30 years for several important events to transpire on the collectibles marketplace that are critical to a collectible hitting long-term price value stability. And what you got to understand is when we talk about Harry Rinker's 30-year rule, a major portion of the production run for this to occur either needs to be in use and or destroyed. So those of you out there, anyone in my audience who is collecting Alpha Edition, Beta Edition Magic the Gathering cards, you are onto something with that concept. If you are even collecting video games, most video games back in the 1980s, a lot of people didn't think that they would become collectible. I'm sure a lot of you can recall if you did have a thing for video games back in the 80s. Once your Nintendo started to gather dust, you traded the games in, you sold them at a yard sale, then you went and bought a Super Nintendo. Once your Super Nintendo started to gather dust and the Nintendo 64 or the Sony PlayStation was on the horizon, you traded in your Super Nintendo and you bought a Nintendo 64 or you bought a Sony PlayStation. It is very important to understand planned obsolescence in a lot of these markets, especially if they are electronic in nature. When we look at vintage computers, when we look at vintage iPads, when we look at even vintage video games, of course. So this is something that you have to understand if you're going to study these markets. Another thing you must understand is that the individuals that grew up with the object in question need to have grown old enough to miss it and nostalgic enough to want to reacquire it. And number three, wealthy enough to be able to afford it on the secondary market. So with that in mind, I'm going to go through the life cycle of the average pop culture collectible. And I want you guys to pay attention because this ties in to a lot of other lessons I did on this YouTube channel. It's very vital that anybody who watches this channel at least get some exposure and understanding to this core concept. I want to state that. So, stage one, the item, or soon-to-be collectible item, is introduced into the market. This occurs during a period of 0 to 10 years. Now, why did I state 0 to 10 years here? Well, if you look at some of the most popular pop culture collectibles today in the year 2021, their original lifespan, when they are released as video games or toys or comic books or trading cards, the lifespan was really anywhere from 0 to 10 years. If you don't believe me, if you look at vintage Star Wars figures, vintage Star Wars figures came on the scene in 1978. By 1984, that market was already dying. Masters of the Universe was the next big thing that Mattel released to try to take market share away from, at that particular time, Kenner Toys, who had the Star Wars franchise. So toy enthusiasts at that time, we didn't know if they were collectors or not, but back in the 70s and 80s, they were pretty much going after Star Wars. When Star Wars lost its flavor after Return of the Jedi came out, people were like, oh, there's not going to be another Star Wars movie. They were looking for something else to latch onto. Other examples of this, if you look at the Nintendo Entertainment System, the Nintendo Entertainment System came out in the United States in 1985. By 1992, a lot of the original core people that grew up and really were into Nintendo had already moved on to the Sega Genesis, which came to the United States in 1989, along with the TurboGrafx 16. But in 1992, Nintendo released the Super Nintendo. So the lifespan of the original Nintendo was cut short. Again, 0 to 10 years. Even if you go back and you study the Pokemon, the original Pokemon bubble, when Pokemon came to the United States in the late 1990s, if you would study that market went strong for a couple of years. There was an actual speculative bubble that occurred in that market back then. But literally, less than 10 years later, that market had cooled off. And a lot of the people that grew up with Pokemon at that time, they were tiring of the franchise. If you don't believe me, why do you think a box of Skyridge, factory seal booster box of Skyridge, goes for what it does in the year 2021? It's because when Skyridge was released, and a lot of those sets were released, there wasn't the demand for Pokemon that there originally was in the late 1990s, guys. A lot of these markets, these items that are introduced into the market, they only have a lifespan of anywhere from 0 to 10 years. Now, I know what you're going to say. Sean, what about Beanie Babies? Beanie Babies was not a true collectible. Beanie Babies, much like Pogs, was a mass-produced scarce item that had planned collectability built in from the beginning. Going back to the beginning of this video, I told you the best long-term collectibles were never marketed and sold or intended to be collectibles. Beanie Babies and Pogs were designed to be collectibles. As a result, they died off long before they got to the 4 stages of these collectible items and their lifespan. Now, this is very important. Stage 2, the item is discontinued. So if we take my DeLorean time machine and we go back to 1992, pretty much in the US at that particular time, the market for video games was transitioning from the 8-bit era to the 16-bit era. By 1992, it heated up because the Super Nintendo was released. So, obviously, the 8-bit Nintendo was starting to die out. If you want to look at action figures, in 1984, the market for vintage Star Wars toys at that particular time started to die out. If you don't believe me, why do you think today, in the year 2021, I'm going to prove my point with you guys. If you look up the value of the coveted last 17 Power of the Force action figures from the original vintage Star Wars line, the ones that came packaged with the little coin, the reason why they sell for a premium is because they were dumped in bargain bins in late 1984, and nobody wanted to buy them. You could have went into any Kitty City, any Toys R Us, any KB toy store, and you could have bought those figures for literally a few dollars from the bargain bin. Same thing is true, you video game collectors out there. Why do you think Little Samson is so coveted when we talk about collectible Nintendo games? Because it came out right around 1992 when the Nintendo Entertainment System was already dying. At that particular point, most video game enthusiasts already owned either a Super Nintendo, a Sega Genesis, or, dare I say it, a TurboGrafx 16. And we know how that played out. So these points are very valid. Now, in stage 2, the item that is not yet collectible is discontinued and or is forgotten about because primary market demand decreases, shrinks, or disappears. In a market for Pokemon cards, I've already used this as an example, the market started to shrink in the early to mid 2000s, okay? Now, stage 3 emerges 20 to 30 years later, like clockwork. The nostalgia reemerges. The people that grew up with vintage Nintendo, with Pokemon, with Magic the Gathering, with Star Wars, with Transformers, with G.I. Joe, even if we look at Pez, Lionel trains, Western collectibles, all these items that they coveted as a kid, you can even apply this to comic book guys. 20 to 30 years later, nostalgia hits the marketplace. And a lot of these people re-enter the market and they seek out these items. And that's what leads to a lot of these items becoming collectible 20 to 30 years later after they were either discontinued and or died out on the primary market. Now, this is the most dangerous stage of a collectible's life. And this is what a lot of you guys that are arguing with me that video games are going to be the next big thing. No, Sean, it's going to be Pokemon cards. Nope, it's going to be Magic the Gathering. Nope, it's going to be some item that we don't even know what is yet. Well, guess what? You're in stage 3 for all of those markets. When we talk about Pokemon, Magic the Gathering, and even collectible and or graded video games. This is the most dangerous stage because mass speculation occurs. This is why when I tell you guys, you cannot trust the validity of the market just because a Super Mario 64 game graded by Wada in 9.8 with a A++ factory sealed sold for $1.5 million. The market is too speculative. It is not established, which we're going to get to in a little bit here. Now, stage 4. The market peaks and starts to cool. That happens anywhere from 0 to 20 years after mass speculation occurs. Meaning after this speculative market for all these toys, games, items that we grew up with, when that market emerges, literally 0 to 20 years later, you have the market peak. Now, why is it 0 to 20 years? I get asked this a lot, and I want to answer this in full. If you look at certain markets that became popular, to use this as an example, during the quote-unquote Corona crash, markets like Marvel Universe trading cards that you guys were arguing with me were going to be the next big thing. A lot of times, mass speculation occurs in that market, but it doesn't go anywhere. Now, I am not stating that Marvel Universe trading cards, as much as I personally don't like that market, isn't going to go anywhere. But what I am stating is you have to be very careful because when the speculation stage occurs, this is the most dangerous time to invest in any of these collectibles. What you want to really do, if you are a true investor, if you are a true market connoisseur, you want to wait until the market peak starts. And if you want to get involved in these markets, you want to wait for the market to start to cool 0 to 20 years later, and that's when you want to do your buying. If you are a true collector, if you don't care about the investment element. So those of you that collect Pez, those of you that collect Lionel toy trains, those of you that collect Barbie, Hot Wheels, Western toy collectibles, even vintage toy robots that were made in Japan, all you guys should be having a heyday right about now because those markets are starting to die out and tank. The market already hit its peak. It is now cooling off. Now, this is where it gets very important, guys. Stage 4, after stage 4, these collectibles either become established on the trade, they become established markets, they're no longer speculative, or the collecting category dies out. Now, what is the number one predictor of a dying collecting category? Let me tell you. Younger generations must enter the market or the collectible dies. And that is what is happening right now when we look at Pez, when we look at, obviously, Western toy collectibles. They're pretty much already dead. When we look at vintage toy robots, when we look at Lionel trains, Hot Wheels cars, Barbies, there aren't enough younger generations, younger collectors coming into these markets to prop up prices even further as the original generation of collectors starts to die off and or sell off their cherished assets. So this is what a lot of you are missing. This is the life cycle of the average pop culture collectible. And now that we're 17 minutes into this video, I'm going to give you guys a little tip. Comic books are right here. Comic books are hitting a market peak right now. Those of you that are telling me in 20 years from now, your copy of Giant Size X-Men 1 or Amazing Spider-Man 121 is going to be even higher than what it is today, you better hope that younger generations who are no longer exposed to comic books on a regular basis are going to be coming into that market, and they're going to replace all of these collectors my age who in another 10, 20 years, we're going to be pretty much selling off these collectibles in mass to finance our retirements and get ready for, I hate to say it, being 6 feet under, guys. This is very important to understand. Now, this is where the Timmies, Kimmies, and Poindexters make their mistake. I'm going to show you. In stage 3, the speculation stage, this is where they all start to invest in the collectible. And history has shown us, going all the way back to the 1960s, that this is the worst time to buy most of these collectibles from a long-term investment standpoint. Now, to be fair to my critics, if you're a speculator and you're operating in these markets and you're involved in a market like this and you're just a short-term flipper, you can make a ton of money selling to the Timmies, Kimmies, and Poindexters who do not understand the life cycle of an average pop culture collectible. That is the end of the lesson today. Do you see how this all fits together? Let me know in the comment section below if I need to do a sequel to this video. Thank you for watching. I value your feedback. Have a great night.